All proposed references to ban military bases in the Declaration of Principles or transitory provisions were quashed by the majority. The statement, "No foreign military bases, troops, or facilities shall be allowed in Philippine territory," was deleted in the draft section on foreign policy. As such, foreign bases may just come back. As for foreign troops, these have already been allowed under the RP-US Visiting Forces Agreement ratified by the Senate in 1999. These forces have been on extended tour in Mindanao. Whether their presence is beneficial or not, a matter that has always divided the people, questions about jurisdiction over erring personnel and operational command on the ground, infringing on national sovereignty, has once again surfaced. Also dropped from the text was the injunction to establish, along with other countries, a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, or soft PAN. Neutrality as a foreign policy orientation was simply too way ahead of the time, when the Cold War was yet to end. Even today, in the post-Cold War period, the political leadership doesn't seem to be any closer toward this ideal. Even as the expanded ASEAN has moved forward toward the goal of a soft PAN, the fact is the presidency and the military institutions continue to be tied to U.S. military aid and foreign policy. Only this provision was carried in Section 25 of the transitory provisions that, after the expiration in 1991 of the RP-US Military Bases Agreement, foreign military bases, troops, or facilities shall not be allowed except under a treaty duly concurred in by the Senate, meaning it gets votes of at least two-thirds of the senators. And when Congress requires, it would have to be ratified in a national referendum and be recognized as a treaty by the U.S.
A tough battle ensued in the first post-martial law Congress in 1991, when the lease on the Clark Air and Subic naval bases was about to expire. On one side were the anti-bases senators. On the other side were President Corazon Aquino and her pro-bases senators who wanted a new bases treaty ratified. On September 16, 1991, the anti-bases senators won by a vote of 12 against 11. That historic number spelled the end of some 50 years of American military bases in the country. What was not won in the CONCOM was eventually won in the Senate and the Parliament of the streets.
Emerging from the dictatorship, where the AFP served as the main instrument of war and repression, a repression that only fueled more rebellions, even in its own ranks. The commissioners knew that one of their historic tasks was to put the military in its proper place. To their credit, they succeeded in framing important core principles. Civilian authority is at all times supreme over the military, was secured in Article 2. The state shall insulate the AFP from partisan political activities. In turn, no member shall engage in partisan politics directly or indirectly except to vote. The state shall strengthen the AFP's professionalism, patriotism, nationalist consciousness, and respect for people's rights. The police shall be separated from the AFP to ensure a fully civilian character. Commissioner Napoleon Rama argued against what he called the exaggerated importance given to the defense of the state. Consequently, that the defense of the state is the prime duty of government, a line found in the 1935 and 1973 constitutions to justify mobilizing the people for military service, was purged.
To enunciate that its prime duty is to defend the state and thus compel every citizen to be a soldier is to make the building of a large armed forces as the government's overriding obligation. It gives the military a primordial position in the political hierarchy, a role wider and more important than a democratic constitution would allow it.
Rama said that the old provision was lifted from the Constitution of the Spanish Republican government. He didn't find a similar one in 86 other constitutions that he reviewed. Article 2, Section 4 now reads, "The prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people. The government may call upon the people to serve, and in fulfillment thereof, all citizens may be required under conditions provided by law to render political, military, or civil service."
One other new approach in the Constitution was defining the role of the military, but it's not an instrument for oppression, because that breeds discontent, that breeds armed conflict, but they are defined as protectors of the people and the state.
The people perspective was a complete turnaround from the state perspective. Citizen mobilization, it was also clarified, shall only be for defensive purpose, not for aggressive wars. However, the body rejected by a vote of 22 against 5 the explicit recognition of the right to refuse to be drafted on the ground of objections of conscience, leaving it up to Congress to pass such a law. Deliberating on the AFP became a fierce battleground because it will pit Filipinos against fellow Filipinos and send the wrong signal that a military solution to the domestic conflicts was being espoused. The draft statement that the military shall be employed in internal security was voted out of the text. Proponent, the soldier De Castro, cried, "The Commission wants communism in the country." After more exchange of fire, the compulsion on the state to disband the notorious CHDF, or Civilian Home Defense Forces, and other paramilitary groups was lost to the majority, who wanted to leave the option to the president and the military. Only armed groups not duly constituted by authority or inconsistent with the citizen armed force shall be dissolved. Because of pressure from the AFP, then President Corazon Aquino did not immediately disband the CHDF, as many had expected her to do. And now, the CHDF has returned in the guise of the CAFCUs, or the Citizens Armed Force Geographical Units, competing with the NPA in recruiting farmers and indigenous peoples into their respective troops and slugging it out in the community's backyard. To secure state sovereignty and the integrity of the national territory, this is the mandate of the AFP as given by the Constitution. While quite clear with regards to foreign threats, gray areas emerge when applied to Moro separatism, which asserts its own national identity and entitlement to its own government, and to the CPP, which seeks to build a new state. This mandate of the AFP has put it in direct bloody collision with the different armed groups then and now.
Section 10, Article 2. The state shall pursue social justice in all phases of national development.
Like peace, no definition of social justice was spelled out, but it was clear that the drafting committee wanted all its dimensions relevant to the Philippine setting incorporated.
The 1935 Constitution's concern was mainly economic prosperity, and the 1973 Constitution became a little bit more explicit in that. The new article is a development beyond the 1935 Constitution. I do not see why we should allow ourselves to be nailed to the 1935 Constitution when we have liberated ourselves already from that rather limited concept of social justice. This phrase, all phases of national development, includes socio-economic, socio-political, and cultural development. We have transcended the 1935 Constitution.
Studies have shown that people do not take up arms simply because they are hungry, when the law or the system, through inaction or outright denial, do not give more to those who have less in life and as a result, human dignity and group identities are solid, then they take up arms against the government. Social justice results from the equitable use and distribution of both political power and material wealth. It requires a government committed to positive action. The Bill of Rights focused on citizens' civil and political rights, and it was left for the article on social justice to spell out economic, cultural, and social rights, especially of specific sectors disadvantaged in particular ways. In Article 13, we find social justice and human rights conjoined. The different elements of social justice was spelled out: labor, agrarian reform, urban land reform and housing, health, women, people's organizations, and human rights. The extensive provisions on social justice for many of our commissioners are the foundation for the peace vision in the Constitution. For it is the quest for social justice that has given rise to our many insurgencies, and in its guarantee, the peaceful resolution lies.
The interesting thing is that social justice provisions were not limited to the article on social justice, which of course the first time there was a separate article, but in other places of the Constitution. If I'm asked, how would you encapsulate the Constitution in one sentence? I would say that it is that phrase in the social justice provisions that says, equitably diffusing wealth and political power for the common good. That, to me, is the spirit of the new Constitution, and it has very important consequences to what happens in our country, because we saw that as the path to both justice and progress. That's why the separate articles on the economy and the social justice were next to each other.
Of a basic charter, which already, I think, carries within it very strong, human rights and justice provisions, which really allows us to build the kind of peaceful society which, as Pepe Diokno advised us, I remember seeking his counsel, it has to address the issues of jobs and justice, food and freedom, land and liberation that would create a nation for our children. That was how Pepe Diokno, in his very succinct manner, kind of summarized what the kind of constitution we require as a people. The social justice article or provision in human rights, the Bill of Rights, represented the very heart of this basic document.
On my own part, one of the provisions that I'm very proud of is the provision on cooperatives. It's the first ever provision that recognized cooperatives as very important institutions in building communities and the nation.
So I think the Muslim issues, for example, the NPA issues, we tried to solve the first one with the autonomous region, and the second one with social justice, and also, for example, party list system, which sought to give participation to marginalized national, sectoral, and regional parties. Of course, the interpretation of the Supreme Court, I think, is erroneous, that this should only be the marginalized economic sectors, because the intent and the letter of the Constitution is very clear that it is marginalized national parties.